I'm quite happy with that because it's about Mick Dundee, who represents the Australian outback, and a lot of people think around the world is a typical Australian. You shouldn't be groping people.
2 weeks ago, a stranger walked up to Paul Hogan and quoted a line from a film he made 40 years ago. 3 days later, another stranger did the same thing. A bridge rigger from Western Sydney accidentally created one of cinema's most enduring characters, built an entire nation's global image, and is now watching that legacy get rewritten while his son performs for tabloid cameras on a Venice Beach street. The lines that won't die. In 2025, Crocodile Dundee was back in cinemas. Not as a tribute screening, not as a one-night event for film nerds, but as a full theatrical release with a brand new 4K digital restoration, a Dolby Atmos soundtrack, extended outback sequences filmed in Kakadu National Park, and a text acknowledgement at the start of the picture honoring the traditional custodians of the land on which the film was shot. The production company Rimfire Films and Paramount Pictures have branded it the Encore Cut, and it premiered in January of 2025 at the open-air cinema in Sydney's Royal Botanic Gardens. The wider theatrical release followed on the 8th of May 2025, when Paul Hogan, now 85 years old, sat down with Australia's Today Show to discuss all of this. He mentioned almost casually that 2 weeks earlier a stranger in America had come up to him and said, "Shrimp on the Barbie." 3 days after that, someone else found him and delivered, "That's not a knife." In 4 decades, across 2 continents, through multiple marriages, a tax evasion investigation that lasted 7 years, a son who courts tabloid chaos for sport, and more sequels than anyone needed, the lines have never once gone quiet. In a separate interview, looking back on 35 years of being recognized, Hogan described what that kind of cultural permanence actually feels like from the inside. He said the line had been quoted at him thousands and thousands of times by all sorts of people, and that the list includes both Prince Charles and Clint Eastwood. The 2 most famous phrases from the film have now outlived the Cold War, the VHS tape, and 3 decades of action movie franchises built on larger budgets and faster editing. A film made for $8.8 million has grossed $328 million worldwide, and is still, in 2025, being released in cinemas. The Encore Cut will also become the permanent standard version of the film for all future streaming and television releases. Every future viewer, every child who discovers Mick Dundee on a Saturday afternoon, will watch this version. The definition of the film has quietly shifted, and Paul Hogan is comfortable with that. But the Encore Cut is not simply a sharper version of the original. 2.5 minutes of footage have been permanently removed, and what was cut opened a debate that went far beyond one film. The scene that had to go. There is a scene in the original 1986 Crocodile Dundee that most people who saw it as children remember with vague discomfort, and most people who encounter it today find genuinely difficult to watch. Mick Dundee is at a New York bar. He meets a trans woman. He is told she is a man dressed as a woman. His response is to grab her between the legs, causing her to flee in distress while the entire bar erupts in cheers. A callback to that moment appears later in the film at an upscale party, where Dundee does the same thing to a woman and tells her, "I was just making sure." Both of those moments are gone from the Encore Cut. So is a reference to Dundee's age, which the production appears to have removed to soften the optics of the 19-year age gap between Hogan and his co-star, Linda Kozlowski. In total, approximately 2.5 minutes of footage have been excised. The production company Rimfire Films explained in a statement released ahead of the premiere that some years ago, Paramount Pictures and other distributors had requested the reference to the crossdresser be edited from the original film, as they found it offensive, and that Rimfire had agreed to that request. They pointed out to me and said, "This guy is a folk hero around the world. He shouldn't be groping people." And I thought, yeah, that's right, he shouldn't be. So take it out. He did it in all innocence, in naivety, but it's better without it. Director Peter Feynman, who made the original film, offered a more complicated response. He acknowledged that re-edits of films are not unprecedented, but told press that he thought screwing around with history, in the arts particularly, is not a good idea. That tension between the creator who made the film and the star who wants to improve it runs through the entire encore cut conversation. Hogan has been consistent and unambiguous. The scenes should have never been in the film, and removing them is an improvement, not a compromise. The reaction in Australia was significant. The Sydney Morning Herald and 7 News were openly critical of the edit. Commentators drew comparisons to George Lucas's controversial alterations to the original Star Wars trilogy, arguing that changing a historical artifact to suit present sensibilities sets a precedent that makes every film vulnerable to retroactive revision. Others pointed out the deeper irony embedded in the decision. By cutting specific moments of offense, the encore cut implicitly endorses the rest of the film as having aged acceptably. It has not aged uniformly. The broader framing of Dundee as a paternalistic protector of women, and a scene in the sequel where he nearly pushes a man off a building upon discovering he is gay, were left untouched. What is worth noting historically is that there were always 2 versions of the original film. Australian audiences received a longer cut with more slang and additional scenes. International audiences received a shorter, modified version in which much of the Australian vernacular had been adjusted for comprehension. The encore cut is built on the international version with extended Kakadu footage added back in and the offensive content removed. The original Australian cut of 1986, longer and unaltered, still exists. It is simply no longer the version the world will see. Before any of this became a cultural argument, the man at the center of it was working 400 feet above Sydney Harbour on a rigger's harness, and he got into television entirely by accident, on a dare from his workmates. From the bridge to the screen. Paul Hogan was born in Parramatta, spent years insisting he was from Lightning Ridge because it sounded better, and was working 400 feet above Sydney Harbour when none of this had happened yet. The thing that changed everything was a bad television panel and a rigger who found cruelty intolerable. 1971. Channel 9's talent show, New Faces, had made a format out of publicly humiliating people brave enough to perform. The judges were the entertainment. The nervous amateur on stage was the material. Hogan watched this from his couch in Granville, growing increasingly certain that someone ought to walk out there and say something about it. Week after week, the same ritual played out. Hopeful amateurs, rehearsed sneers, manufactured humiliation dressed up as light entertainment for the viewing public's amusement. To Hogan, watching from his living room with his workmates, there was nothing remotely funny about it. It was a lion's den with a studio audience, and the lions were winning every single time without anyone having the nerve to push back. One of his workmates said the words he couldn't shake. Someone should do it. He said he would, and then he actually did. He walked onto that stage in his work boots rather than stage shoes, carrying wooden prop knives and billing himself as a tap-dancing knife thrower from Lightning Ridge, a description that was pure invention from start to finish. Instead of performing anything resembling an act, he turned away from the audience entirely and delivered a sustained, unscripted roast directly at the judges for several continuous minutes, dissecting their cruelty with the casual confidence of someone who had absolutely nothing to lose. He finished with a shuffle that barely qualified as dancing and threw the wooden props onto the floor. The judges were unmoved and made their displeasure known. Every person watching at home responded in the opposite direction entirely. He was invited back for another appearance, and then another after that, and by the end of that year, had placed second in the national finals, an outcome that made no logical sense for a man with no act, no agent, no training, and no plan beyond the original dare. Television producer Mike Willesee sent a reporter to find the bridge rigger who kept winning audiences over. The segment landed well enough that Willesee offered him a recurring slot on A Current Affair. Hogan asked to see the script first, read it, told Willesee he could see exactly why it hadn't worked. Willesee, instead of being offended, thought, "This is the person," hired him on the spot. Somewhere inside that building was John Cornell, producer, future business partner, the one person who immediately understood what to do with what had been sitting on the Sydney Harbour Bridge all along. For the first 2 years, Hogan kept his rigger union tickets current, scaffolding certifications too, just in case the audience stopped laughing. There was no arrogance in any of this, no assumption that the camera would keep calling. He had built things with his hands his entire adult life, and a man who builds things with his hands does not throw away his tools until he is absolutely certain he will never need them again. The Paul Hogan Show ran for 60 episodes across 11 years on channels 7 and 9. Never lost its time slot once. Crossed to British screens on Channel 4 from 1982. The man from Parramatta, the one who told everyone he was from Lightning Ridge, had become, entirely by accident, the most watched television personality in Australia. The hardest part of all of it, as Hogan told the Today Show in 2025, was not the jump from television to Hollywood. It was the much earlier and stranger transition from rigger to celebrity, from a person whose worth was measured in physical labor to someone who was suddenly famous without yet being financially comfortable. He described being poor and famous simultaneously as deeply uncomfortable. Everything after that, he said, was easy. What made the entire world embrace a short, regular-looking man from a Sydney suburb as one of cinema's great folk heroes is more deliberate and more personal than the effortless charm suggests. Why the world believed Mick was real. The idea for Crocodile Dundee came to Paul Hogan while he was in New York City. He stood in Manhattan and asked himself a single question. What would happen if a genuine Northern Territory bushman arrived here right now? The character was not invented from nothing. Mick Dundee was partly inspired by the real documented exploits of Rod Ansell, a Northern Territory buffalo hunter who in 1977 survived 56 days alone in the Australian wilderness after his boat sank. Ansell lived off the land, hunted crocodiles, and eventually walked to safety entirely unassisted. Hogan took that authentic survival instinct and layered it on top of the television persona he had been developing for over a decade. He's a mythical outback Australian who does exist in part. The frontiersman who walks through the bush, picking up snakes and throwing them aside, living off the land. It's like the image the Americans have of us, so why not give them one? When Hogan sat down with the Today Show in 2025 and was asked why the character resonated so deeply, his answer was immediate and specific: credibility. He pointed out that he was not tall or handsome, not built like a film star. He was a regular-sized, ordinary-looking person, not Chris Hemsworth. That ordinariness was not an accident, and it was not a limitation. It was the engine of the entire film. Audiences watched someone who looked exactly like a real person, not a manufactured hero, face the bewildering machinery of New York City with cheerful and genuine unfamiliarity. The bidet scene, filmed at the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, was pulled directly from Hogan's own first encounter with one during a trip to Singapore. He was not performing naivety for the camera. He was performing a memory. The knife scene, which became the most quoted line in Australian cinema history, was written in the same spirit. Hogan described writing it and thinking it was amusing, nothing more. He had no expectation it would enter the language permanently. The scene itself was filmed beneath the white-tiled arches of the South Arcade at New York's Municipal Building on Center Street in Lower Manhattan. Hogan delivered the line quietly, casually, and moved on. The location still exists and looks almost identical to how it appeared in 1985 during production. The film was shot on a budget of $8.8 million. The money was raised partly through Australia's 10BA tax concession scheme via Morgan sharebrokers, and partly through direct investment from members of the cast and crew themselves. Principal photography began on the 13th of July, 1985. 6 weeks were spent filming in Kakadu National Park in the Northern Territory. 6 more weeks were filmed in New York City. When director Peter Feynman wrapped production, Hogan told journalists it was going to be Australia's first proper movie. that the country had not yet made one that qualified as a real, general public, successful, entertaining film. Paramount Pictures bought the North American distribution rights for $6 million. They were not the first studio approached. Both 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers had passed. Paramount released it in the United States on the 26th of September, 1986. The film opened at #1 at the American box office. It stayed at #1 for 9 consecutive weeks. It sold over 46 million tickets in North America alone. It became the second highest grossing film in the United States for that entire year, pipped only by Top Gun. Worldwide, it grossed $328 million against a budget of $8.8 million, a return of more than 37 to 1, and it holds a Guinness World Record as the highest-grossing Australian film ever made. That level of success did not happen in isolation. It arrived at the precise moment Australia was achieving something else on the world stage that nobody had managed in 132 years, and the combination of those two things rewired how the entire world understood this country. The shrimp, the cup, and a country's identity. Paul Hogan is precise about how much credit he deserves for Australia's global visibility in the 1980s. He says he helped, and he credits Alan Bond's America's Cup win alongside his own contribution. That framing is historically exact. On the 26th of September, 1983, Alan Bond's Yacht Australia II, skippered by John Bertrand, ended the New York Yacht Club's 132-year unbroken hold on the America's Cup. It was the first time since the trophy's inception in 1851 that any country other than the United States had won it. Australia, too, came from one race down with a dramatic comeback on the final leg to win by 41 seconds. The reaction in Australia was unlike anything the country had experienced in living memory. Prime Minister Bob Hawke went on television and declared that any boss who sacked anyone for not turning up to work that day was a bum. The boxing kangaroo became a national symbol overnight. Men at Work's song Down Under became the unofficial anthem of the moment. Alan Bond, the man who had bankrolled the campaign through 4 separate challenges spanning nearly a decade, became a national hero. The win made the world pay attention to Australia as a competitive, capable, ambitious country, rather than simply a distant curiosity. 2 years later, Crocodile Dundee arrived in American cinemas, landing in a country that had already been prepared. American audiences had spent the early 1980s watching Paul Hogan on their television screens in a series of advertisements for the Australian Tourist Commission, in which he invited them warmly to come to the Wonder Down Under and promised to slip an extra shrimp on the barbie for them. The line was technically an Americanism since Australians call them prawns, not shrimp, but the warmth was entirely authentic, and American audiences received it as such. According to Tourism Australia, that campaign lifted Australia from 49th to 1st on the list of most desired international destinations for American travelers. For most Americans, before the movie came out, Hogan was that funny Aussie bloke who told them he'd put another shrimp on the barbie. In a sense, the movie is a continuation of the campaign. The film then did something the tourism campaign could never have done on its own. It made Kakadu National Park a global destination. The location manager who scouted the film later recalled that in 1986, Australians themselves had barely been to Kakadu, let alone Americans. The Northern Territory government had built the roads into Kakadu not for tourism, but for mining. The film transformed that overnight. The Crocodile Hotel was built directly in response to the tourist interest the film generated. Yellow Water Billabong became one of the most visited wildlife sites in Australia. In the United Kingdom, the film's numbers were staggering by any standard. It opened at a single cinema, the Leicester Square Theatre in London, in December of 1986, and broke the house record in its first week. It stayed at #1 nationally for 8 weeks. On Christmas Day of 1989, it debuted on BBC One and drew 21.8 million viewers, which remains to this day the single most watched Christmas Day program in British broadcasting history. In Ireland, it became the highest-grossing film of all time. In New Zealand, it held the same record. One film, made for less than $9 million in remote outback Australia, had become the most powerful tourism advertisement any country had ever produced. Fame at that scale opens rooms that most people never enter. And on one specific evening in London, Paul Hogan found himself seated in a cinema with the two most photographed people alive on either side of him. Prince Charles on one side, Diana on the other. The premiere of Crocodile Dundee, 2 in London, placed Paul Hogan between Prince Charles and Princess Diana in the cinema. Both of them, at moments they found funny on screen, turned and nudged him, wanting to know if he approved of his own jokes. His response, delivered decades later with characteristic dryness, was, "Don't they know I'm a rigger?" The Clint Eastwood encounter carries the same weight, but lands differently because Eastwood understood exactly what had happened. At a dinner with Elizabeth Taylor, Eastwood was seated 2 tables away. He walked across the room, leaned over, picked up Hogan's table knife, and asked how many times he had heard the line. Eastwood is one of the small number of actors in cinema history who delivered a line so clean and specific that it entered everyday speech permanently. He knew what that meant. When Hogan confirmed he had written it himself, Eastwood's assessment was brief and unambiguous. "You're right, it works." 2 men who had each written something that escaped the screen and refused to come back, comparing notes at someone else's dinner party. I was at a dinner with Liz Taylor, and Clint Eastwood was at 2 tables over, and he walked over, leaned over, and picked up my table knife, and he said, "How many times have you heard it?" The full inventory of what Crocodile Dundee produced for Hogan professionally is worth laying out completely. He won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy in 1987. His screenplay received an Academy Award nomination, the first Australian screenplay to receive that distinction in that category. He co-hosted the 59th Academy Awards alongside Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn, and delivered one of the more memorably economical speeches in the history of award season, identifying the 3 essential qualities of receiving an award: be gracious, be grateful, and get off. He was named Australian of the Year in 1985, and was not present to collect it because he was in Canada filming at the time. He was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for service to tourism and entertainment. The roles he turned down are as revealing as the ones he took. A Paramount executive pitched a crossover film that would have placed Mick Dundee alongside Eddie Murphy's Axel Foley from Beverly Hills Cop. Hogan declined. He turned down Rambo-style action roles. He declined scripts involving gratuitous violence. In 1990, he was offered the lead in Ghost, one of the biggest films of that year. He turned it down to make Almost an Angel, in which he played a petty criminal who believes he has become an angel after a near-death experience. Ghost went on to earn $500 million at the global box office. Almost an Angel did not. Hogan has never publicly expressed regret about the decision. In 2016, he accepted the Longford Lyell Award, the highest honor of the Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Arts, for outstanding contribution to the Australian screen. He described himself in his acceptance remarks as a one-hit wonder, with what all present understood to be genuine rather than false modesty. He had made one great film, one that changed his country's relationship with the world, and he had protected the character in it from every commercial pressure that tried to distort it. That, by any measure, is enough. Despite all of it, the royals, the Hollywood legends, the records, the awards, and the global recognition, there is one place Paul Hogan says he belongs, and one reason tied to family that is keeping him from going back. The man who would come back tomorrow. Paul Hogan lives in Venice Beach, Los Angeles, approximately 1 block from the boardwalk, in a home reported to be worth $3.5 million. He has no particular attachment to it. He keeps sunglasses on when he goes out. He pulls a cap low over his face. He moves through the neighborhood, largely unrecognized, which he appears to prefer. When the Today Show interviewer asked him in May of 2025 whether he would ever move back to Australia, his answer came without pause: tomorrow. Asked immediately why he had not done so already, he gave 2 reasons: business and his son. In a separate interview with 7 News in 2025, he was even more direct about what coming home means to him at 85. He said, He wants to die there. That is not a morbid statement from a man in decline. It is a statement from someone who has always known where he belongs and has spent decades unable to get there because the people he loves need him somewhere else. His youngest son, Chance Hogan, is 27 years old, the only child from his marriage to Linda Kozlowski, the American actress who played Sue Charlton in Crocodile Dundee and who became his second wife in 1990. They were together for 24 years before Kozlowski filed for divorce in October of 2013, citing irreconcilable differences. The divorce was finalized in 2014. Hogan's response when journalists called the marriage a failure was characteristically precise. How can you call something a failure after a quarter of a century together? Chance has attracted sustained tabloid attention in recent years. In January of 2025, he posted a video on Instagram in which he appeared to be slurring his words while drinking wine and said that his life had been reduced to this and that he was begging people to end it. Within moments, he posted a follow-up video walking the statement back entirely, describing himself as living the dream and never wanting to leave the table. The sequence attracted significant media coverage and significant concern. Hogan's reading of his son on the Today Show was measured and quietly affectionate. He gets a lot of tabloid stuff, but he's a terrible person because he knows they're watching him and puts something on for them. I'm only living in Los Angeles because he's not ready for me to leave. The minute he's set, or he comes with me, I'm back here. I've had my share of Los Angeles. The family situation Hogan lives inside is stark, and he has never softened it for public consumption. Chance's maternal grandparents are gone. His parents are divorced. Kozlowski has largely retired from public life and been reported to have moved to Morocco. Hogan has told journalists directly that he is the only family Chance has left in America, and that all of the boys' close relatives on both sides are either gone or on the other side of the planet. He has 5 other children from his first marriage to Noeline Edwards: Brett, Clay, Scott, Todd, and Lauren. They live in Australia and New Zealand. His grandson, Jake Hogan, son of Todd, has faced addiction-related legal difficulties. His granddaughter, Miley Hogan, is a reporter for Network 7 television in Australia. Hogan, at 85, moves through the world with the ease of someone who resolved the question of who he is a long time ago. The character he created in a New York hotel room 40 years ago still circulates independently across the planet. It still gets quoted in American cities by strangers. It still made 2 members of the British royal family reach over and nudge the man who wrote it because they wanted to share the joke. The man himself is in Venice Beach, cap pulled down, utterly unrecognized, counting the days until he can take a flight south and east across the Pacific. There is something in that image worth holding. The most famous Australian to ever export Australian identity to the world. The man who put a country on the map with a knife joke and a shrimp line he wrote himself. Living 1 block from a Venice Beach boardwalk, patiently waiting to go home. 40 years on, the lines are still being delivered in American streets. The film is back in cinemas, and the man who made it is waiting to go home. Tell us in the comments what Crocodile Dundee meant to you and whether you think the encore cut was the right call.